Hey there, team! This video is part of a series of lore recaps focused on the Warcraft universe. This time, we're diving deep in on a location unlike any other, full of new factions, new characters, and new evils. There's a lot that goes down, and I'll try to cover as much of it as I can in the best ways that I can. That being said, be warned that I'm not going to cover everything that happens, but will for sure supply you with all the lore that you need to know. So master your inner strength, break open your favorite brew, and get ready to answer the call of rebellion as we tackle World of Warcraft's 4th expansion, Mists of Pandaria. Okay, so the old gods had landed on Azeroth and began to conquer it. Then the Pantheon of Titans eventually arrived to the planet, and they created Titan-forged soldiers to fight the armies of the old gods in their stead. Eventually, the Titan-forged armies started winning against the horde of old god minions, but the Pantheon grew worried. They feared that Y'Shaarj, the largest and most powerful of the 4 old gods, would be too great a force for their Titan-forged armies to handle. So the leader of the Pantheon, Aman'Thul, reached down into Azeroth and ripped Y'Shaarj from the planet, tearing it apart. However, Y'Shaarj had buried itself deep into the world of Azeroth, and when it was ripped out of the planet, it had left a massive wound of Azeroth's lifeblood in its place. The Pantheon decided to imprison the remaining old gods instead of destroying them, out of fear of damaging Azeroth any further. Years later, while carrying out work in the deserts of Uldum, Highkeeper Ra discovered the largest remains of Y'Shaarj, mainly its heart. Ra took the heart of Y'Shaarj and locked it away deep beneath the Veil of Eternal Blossoms. The Veil of Eternal Blossoms was one of the cradles of life on Azeroth, set up by the Titanic Keeper Freya, and will eventually sprout outwards into the land known as Pandaria. Anyways, Ra buried the heart of Y'Shaarj and charged some of the Titanforged to forever guard the twisted remains. After the Trolls defeated and split apart the armies of the old gods, some of their Akir forces were driven to the land near where the heart of Y'Shaarj was buried. Slowly being called by the whispers of the remnants of their old master, these Akir would eventually become the Mantid, and I'll get to the Mantid later, but just keep them in the back of your mind for now. The followers of Highkeeper Ra were the Titan-forged Mogu. The Mogu were powerful stone warriors who built and worked and shaped the lands around the Veil of Eternal Blossoms, even after their master Ra-Den fell silent. Eventually, the Mogu fell victim to the curse of flesh, just as all the other Titan-forged races did. The Mogu, however, hated being flesh and blood. They not only gained the mortal abilities of breathing and bleeding, but also the mortal feelings of pride, anger, and greed. And without any Titanic Keeper to keep them in check, the Mogu began to wage war amongst themselves. Eventually, the Mogu split themselves into different factions with their own kings and customs. However, every 100 years, the Mantid would rise up and assault the Mogu-controlled lands, and every 100 years, the Mogu would have to put their differences aside and unite to push back against the insectoids. But as soon as the Mantid would be pushed back, the Mogu warlords would go right back to killing each other. One of the Mogu factions was destroyed from within, and one of the only surviving warriors of the clan was Lei Shen. Lei Shen ventured out in search of the Titan Keepers, eventually discovering the resting place of Ra-Den, the Mogu's former master. In events that won't be covered in this video, Ra-Den had learned that the Pantheon of Titans had been slain, and the Keeper no longer saw a point in monitoring or maintaining the planet of Azeroth. Lei Shen was enraged by Ra-Den's despair and fought the High Keeper. The young Mogu defeated Ra-Den and imprisoned his former master, but not before stealing the Keeper's power and also the power of Aman'Thul, which Ra-Den had been guarding. With his new power, Lei Shen became the Thunder King and rallied together a vast army of Mogu and became the first true emperor of the Mogu, and claimed to be emperor of all life that resided in his domain. Lei Shen's Mogu conquered the races of the Veil of Eternal Blossoms, ending with the imprisonment of the White Tiger, and with the enslavement of the Pandaren under its protection. Lei Shen's rule was cruel, but it also resulted in unifying the peoples of his land under one language and one set of laws. Eventually, Lei Shen, in his lust for power and Titan weapons, would lead a force into Uldum. where its residents would activate a powerful Titan weapon, destroying the Thunder King, most of the Mogu forces, and devastating the land of Uldum permanently. Lei Shen's body was recovered and then buried in the Tomb of Conquerors, back in Mogu-owned lands. The Pandaren were a peaceful race who lived around the Veil of Eternal Blossoms. They revered and worshipped the 4 powerful wild gods of their land, the August Celestials. The August Celestials would provide guidance and protection for the Pandaren. That was until Lei Shen defeated and imprisoned the wild gods, and then enslaved the Pandaren as a result. After the death of Lei Shen, one Pandaren slave, Kang, would begin to plot against the Mogu. The Pandaren were not allowed to own or use any weapons, so Kang began to practice teaching himself hand-to-hand combat. He then taught his way of the monk to some of the other Pandaren interested in rebellion. Kang and a small band ventured out to Kunlai's summit, where they discovered the prison of the White Tiger. The White Tiger had taught Kang about inner strength and had joined the Pandaren's rebellion. Very quickly, Kang's rebel army grew, and the other races enslaved by the Mogu would take up arms alongside the Pandas. The Mogu forces were pushed back deeper and deeper into the heart of their empire, until the final battle, where Kang led his forces to victory and ultimately freedom, but at the cost of his own life. The Pandaren would free the remaining August Celestials and establish peace in the land, studying both the wisdom and the martial arts of Kang, and so the Pandaren Empire was born. The fresh-faced Pandaren Empire would only know peace for a brief period before the Zandalari Trolls, allies of the former Mogu warlords, would invade Pandaren land, seeking to claim it as their own. The Zandalari had powerful war beasts that assisted the Trolls in many victories against the Pandaren. The new empire was about to fall to the Zandalari until a young Pandaren called Jiang was able to tame cloud serpents and use them to combat the Zandalari Trolls. She was able to teach other Pandaren how to ride cloud serpents and ended up creating the Order of the Cloud Serpent in the process. With this new order, the Pandaren Empire was able to push back the Trolls into desperation. In a final gambit, the Zandalari Trolls tried to resurrect the dead Thunder King, but they were stopped by Jiang, who sacrificed herself, which killed the Zandalari commanders and prevented the resurrection from being completed. With their leaders lost and all out of options, the Zandalari retreated from Pandaren land, which would end the Zandalari Troll Wars and begin a new age of peace. Years later, the young Xiao Hao would be crowned Emperor of Pandaria. Xiao Hao received a prophecy that predicted the Burning Legion and the Sundering. The Emperor went on a journey to figure out how to save his lands from what was to come. Along his journey, he encountered the malevolent spirits known as the Sha. The Sha were leftover essences of Yasharaj, manifested by strong negative emotions. With the guidance of the August Celestials, Xiao Hao was able to call on and cast out the evil of the Shas. In a final act, the Emperor gave up his life to surround Pandaria in a powerful and impenetrable mist, so when the Sundering eventually happened, Pandaria quietly floated away, hidden from the rest of the world. Thousands of years later, after the events of the Wrathgate and subsequent battle for the Undercity, the Alliance declared war on the Horde. And while the conflict had a brief hiatus during the Cataclysm in order to stop Deathwing, eventually the war chief of the Horde, Garrosh Hellscream, would continue to incite war against the Alliance. Garrosh wanted Kalimdor to be controlled by the Horde exclusively, and began an assault on the Night Elf lands in Ashenvale, as well as the human lands of Theramore and Dustwallow Marsh. While the Horde started to surround the lands around Theramore, Garrosh sent out for his trump card. Jaina Proudmoore, leader of Theramore, called out for aid against the Horde, begging the neutral Kirin Tor for assistance. According to Khadgar, there was a prophecy about Jaina and her part to play in the future of Azeroth, and so the Council of Six decide to lend their support, and several members of the Kirin Tor and of the Alliance as a whole show up to defend Theramore Isle. The battle for Theramore was bloody, but the Alliance held on, long enough for the Horde to call off the assaults and fall back into the marshlands. Unfortunately for Jaina Proudmoore, Garrosh's plan was not to slaughter his way into Theramore. His plan was to gather as many powerful Alliance soldiers and sympathizers into one place, and then drop a bomb on them. Before the launch on Alliance soil began, Garrosh had sent out warriors to track down the Focusing Iris, an immensely powerful magical weapon used by Malygos himself. The Horde warriors killed the blue dragons guarding it and returned the Focusing Iris to Garrosh. The Horde then turned the Iris into a mana bomb, a devastating weapon of horrifying potential. And once most of the Horde soldiers were clear of Theramore, Garrosh's secretly deployed airship emerged from the clouds and dropped the mana bomb on Theramore. Right before the bomb hit, the leader of the Kirin Tor, Ronan, was able to save Jaina and only a handful of Alliance allies, but at the cost of his own life. Jaina Proudmoore had been an ally of the Horde since Warcraft 3, but when she woke up to the corpses of her people and of her city, she forever turned her back on the Horde. Jaina recovered the remains of the mana bomb, specifically the Focusing Iris, and she intended to use it to destroy Orgrimmar. Thanks to the timely arrival of Thrall and Malygos, they were both able to talk her out of it. Afterwards, Jaina took refuge in Dalaran, where the Council of Six elected her to be the new leader of the Kirin Tor, as a replacement for Ronan. And Garrosh Hellscream, beaming with joy over the annihilation of Theramore, set out to wage even more war against the Alliance, but this time at sea. During a naval battle, the ship containing Anduin Wrynn, Prince of Stormwind, ran aground into the misty lands of Pandaria, and so Alliance forces were sent out to rescue him, and Horde forces were sent out to capture him and conquer the new land. The Horde assault on Pandaria was led by the newly promoted General Nazgrim. As the Horde and Alliance clashed on the new continent, the outsiders began to change, and dark creatures began to form in and around them. The Shah. The Shah are the leftover essences of Yasharaj that are summoned and powered by dark emotions, and the war that the Alliance and Horde brought to Pandaria had awoken them. From the get-go, both factions were warned about the Shah by the Shadowpan monks and their leader, Taranzu. However, neither side really listened to Taranzu, and they continued their war, causing the Shadowpan to stew in their anger about the disrupting of the balance being caused. Meanwhile, Anduin was being chased around by the Horde and the Alliance as they each play keep away with him, until the young prince is able to sneak away to study under the August Celestial, Chi-Ji. However, the never-ending war caused the powerful Shahs that were once sealed away to fully return, corrupting the lands of Pandaria. Then, as what usually happens by now, the Alliance and Horde do their little split, where some of the Horde keeps going to war against some of the Alliance, but a good number of Alliance and Horde soldiers put their fight on hold and come and work together to aid the Pandaren and stop the Shah. Anduin Wrynn, along with the members of the Horde and Alliance, visit the August Celestials and their temples to help against the Shah threat, and eventually gain passage to the heart of Pandaria, the Vale of Eternal Blossoms. The Vale has a few problems of its own, the first of which are the Mogu, who are attempting to take control of Pandaria again. Heroes on both sides team up to fight back against the Mogu warlords and their armies, dispersing a few Shah along the way. Another problem would be the Mantid. While the Mantid do swarm up every 100 years and attack Pandaria, due to the Cataclysm, they've awoken up a decade early. And not only that, but the Mantid Queen had been possessed by the Shah of Fear, causing her to lash out and corrupt the minds of several other Mantid. And Azerothian heroes are sent to push back the Mantid forces, kill the Queen, and stop the Shah of Fear altogether. All this while the Horde and Alliance keep building up their own bases on Pandaria, until eventually Garrosh Hellscream and King Varian Wrynn arrive on the continent. Even though Garrosh Hellscream was the warchief of the Horde, his genocidal conquest was not the desire of all members of the Horde. Two Horde leaders in particular had been speaking out against Garrosh since he rose to power, those two being Bane, chieftain of the Bloodhoof Tauren, and Vol'jin, chieftain of the Darkspear Trolls. After the bombing of Theramore, Vol'jin left Orgrimmar and took most of his tribe with him to the Echo Isles in the southern part of Durotar. Vol'jin continued to argue against Garrosh's wanton bloodshed, but ultimately he could do nothing to stop the warchief. By the time the Horde forces had fully arrived in Pandaria, Vol'jin and Bane included, the two began to argue with Garrosh once again. Bane, however, chose to journey to the Vale of Eternal Blossoms to assist the Pandaren and the August Celestials, while Vol'jin stayed behind to try and rein Hellscream in. Sick of arguing and believing himself vindicated in his desires, Garrosh ordered an assassination on Vol'jin. The Darkspear Troll barely survived the attempt, and while in a bloody state is saved by Chen Stormstout, an old friend of Vol'jin and Thrall. The Brewmaster hearthstones the two to Durotar, where they meet up with Thrall, the former warchief of the Horde, and Vol'jin's best friend. Garrosh believes that Vol'jin was successfully assassinated, and the three agree to keep it that way. However, Garrosh has also imprisoned the Darkspear Trolls on the Echo Islands, and Vol'jin is too weak to strike back at the moment. So Chen takes Vol'jin to the Shadowpan Monastery to fully recover, while Thrall begins to rally allies and goes to the Echo Isles in order to save as many Darkspears as he can. Back on Pandaria, Lor'themar Thuran and his Blood Elves discover a powerful Mogu weapon, known as the Divine Bell. The Divine Bell can empower soldiers with the Sha, causing them to become stronger at the cost of being consumed by Old God magic. Unfortunately, this information came at the cost of many Blood Elf lives, none of which were of any concern to Hellscream. Instead, Garrosh attempted to get the bell and use it on the Horde to make his armies unstoppable. Lor'themar would leave Pandaria and begin to think about leaving the Horde altogether. Garrosh didn't care at all though. Instead, the warchief set out to acquire the Divine Bell, only to have the Night Elves steal it first. They took the bell to their capital city of Darnassus. Furious, Garrosh sends a spy of his own into the Sunreavers of Dalaran. The Sunreavers are Blood Elves of the Kirin Tor, allies and citizens of the Wizard City and neutral to the overall conflict between the Horde and the Alliance. But with Garrosh's spy now in the mix, the spy, along with the handful of Sunreaver mages, were able to teleport into Darnassus and steal the Divine Bell, and give the weapon over to the warchief. Garrosh assembled a large Horde force together in Pandaria with the specific purpose of using the Divine Bell on them. Prince Anduin Wrynn was able to sneak his way to where this would take place, and as Garrosh began to use the bell to summon the Sha into his warriors, Anduin was able to stop the bell's magic, and in fact even reverse its effects. In a rage, Garrosh destroys the massive Divine Bell, which crumbles on top of Anduin, severely injuring him. The prince was able to escape, and Garrosh's plans for weaponizing the Sha were stopped. For now. The Sunreaver's involvement with stealing the Divine Bell did not go unnoticed. Jaina Proudmoore had spent much of the conflict defending the Blood Elves of Dalaran, arguing that the Wizard City was neutral and that it was home to all members of the Kirin Tor. But that tune changed when she discovered that the Sunreavers were responsible for the robbery of the Divine Bell. Betrayed, Jaina summoned the forces of the Alliance and those with Alliance loyalties to the Kirin Tor to imprison every last Sunreaver and to kill any Blood Elf who resisted. Word reached Lor'themar and the Blood Elves of Silvermoon quickly of what was happening in Dalaran, and so Silvermoon mages quickly teleported into the city to free the Sunreaver prisoners and save any Blood Elf in the city they could. With several Blood Elves dead and with the Sunreavers being kicked out of their home, all because of Garrosh's plans, the Sin'dorei were beyond furious with both Jaina Proudmoore and Garrosh Hellscream, and they wanted nothing to do with either of them. Anduin Wrynn would make a recovery, good enough to venture out into the lands of Pandaria anyways. Anduin eventually found a tavern where he ran into another prince, the Black Prince Wrathion, the son of Deathwing. Wrathion had a vision of the Burning Legion returning, and the only way to stop the Burning Legion was to have Azeroth stand united. While Anduin agrees, the two disagreed on how exactly unity should be achieved. Anduin believed that the forces of Azeroth would come together for the greater good in order to save the world from the wrath of the Legion, while Wrathion believed that the only way to unite the forces of the world fast enough and to be strong enough to fend off the eventual return of the demon armies was to fully back one faction and to have it completely annihilate the other, annexing any survivors. As he is one to do, Wrathion recruited a few heroes from both the Alliance and the Horde and set them off on various paths to see which faction would win the war, and to whoever did win, the Black Dragon would fully support. The Zandalari leader, Zul the Prophet, had ordered the Zandalari trolls into Pandaria in order to resurrect Lei Shen, the Thunder King. See, the Zandalari were once great allies of the Thunder King, and after the Cataclysm, Zandalar was in dire need of mighty allies. The trolls broke into the tomb of Lei Shen, and they brought his corpse to his former palace, the Throne of Thunder, where they succeeded in resurrecting the Thunder King. Lei Shen began to create his Mogu forces once again from the days of old, and with them, plus the Zandalari trolls, he intended to reclaim all of Pandaria. With the main forces of the Horde and Alliance preoccupied with killing each other, and with whatever Pandaren forces remaining dealing with the Shah, Taran Zu and the Shadowpan began attacking Lei Shen's forces on the Isle of Thunder. It wouldn't be long until Lor'themar Thuran and a group of Silvermoon and Sunreaver Blood Elves arrived to aid the Shadowpan in their fight against the Thunder King. The Blood Elves were more than willing to aid the Shadowpan, since the rest of the Horde was too busy to help, and also, they were looking to procure any powerful items in the Throne of Thunder in preparation for a rebellion against Garrosh Hellscream. Meanwhile, Jaina Proudmoore and her Kirin Tor arrive at the Isle of Thunder, also to aid the Shadowpan, but also to stop the Sunreavers from any of their schemes. Eventually, Taran Zu is able to unite the Horde and Alliance forces on the Isle, after Jaina declares that there can be no peace while Garrosh remains war chief, and Lor'themar solemnly agrees with her. With the Blood Elves and Kirin Tor behind them, the Shadowpan lead an assault on the Throne of Thunder, where they powered through the forces of the Zandalari, the Mogu, and eventually killing Lei Shen, stopping the Thunder King from rising again. While Jaina and Lor'themar were fighting their own battles against the Thunder King, there was a new battle brewing on the home front of Durotar. Vol'jin had acquired enough promises of aid from warriors and leaders of the Horde that he was prepared to return back to the Echo Isles, with a plan of removing Garrosh from the Horde to begin right after the Blood Elves acquired new weapons from the Throne of Thunder. When Vol'jin returned home, however, Garrosh had already branded the Darkspear trolls traitors and had ordered his armies to lay siege to their homes. Vol'jin had to declare his rebellion prematurely, and he, alongside Thrall, rallied the Darkspear forces together to push Garrosh's warriors out of the Echo Isles. Bane and the Tauren eventually arrived, and Vol'jin led his warriors onward to capture Razor Hill just outside of Orgrimmar. Garrosh had sent the recently acquired Dragonmaw clan, as well as General Nazgrim, back to Orgrimmar to put an end to Vol'jin's rebellion, while he stayed behind and unearthed the key to his conquest. For a while, Garrosh had ordered the excavation of an area in the Vale of Eternal Blossoms. That area happened to be the vault which Ra-Den had placed the Heart of Yasharaj. Once the vault was opened, Garrosh slaughtered his way through the Shadowpan that tried to stop him, even defeating Taran Zu. The war chief of the Horde took the heart back with him to Orgrimmar and gathered a massive army of orcs, his true Horde. Garrosh then ordered the capture and execution of all non-orcs, and goblins not on his payroll, residing within the walls of the Horde capital. The Alliance and the rest of the Horde had finally arrived just in time to aid Vol'jin with his rebellion against Hellscream, and they began the siege of Orgrimmar. Thrall had gone on ahead to try and recruit any orcs inside to fight against Garrosh, while Vol'jin worked on defeating those that would side with the pure Horde. After a brutal siege, and with terrible losses, the rebels finally arrived at Garrosh's inner underground lair, where the war chief and his old god Hart awaited them. The leaders of both the Horde and the Alliance had to team up in order to stop Garrosh and the power of the Heart of Y'Shaarj, but they did eventually defeat Hellscream, with Thrall about to give the finishing blow when Varian stopped him. The two argue over who gets the right to decide what happens to the now former war chief of the Horde when an injured Taranzu arrives. The Shadowpan leader demands that Garrosh face trial in Pandaria, since that is where he's done the most damage, and the orc is chained up and taken away to have his fate decided by the Pandaren. With the siege over and Garrosh gone, that leaves a vacancy in the war chief position, one which the leaders of the Horde elect Vol'jin to take up. Varian tells Vol'jin that with Garrosh gone, there can be peace between the Horde and Alliance, but if the Horde makes one undiplomatic move against the Alliance again, that he'll end the Horde for good. The conflicts in and around Pandaria caused terrible pain for both factions, and the wounds they each received would take a long time to heal. And while the Horde and Alliance were willing to begin the process to work towards peace, there was one that was not happy about that idea. Wrathion was still certain that the Burning Legion would return, and soon, and the dragon was also certain that neither the Horde or the Alliance would be ready to stop it. And that about does it. I've skipped some things here, changed some things there, but all in all, this was all the lore you needed to know about World of Warcraft Mists of Pandaria. I know I didn't cover the Panda starting zone, but I don't think you're missing much there. Anyways, thank you so much for helping push this channel to over 1,000 subscribers and for sticking with all the lore videos over the past year. And as always, thank you so much for watching, have a good one, and take it easy.